You know what blows my mind, man? We're living through a moment in combat sports history that nobody could have predicted 10, 15 years ago. Back then, if you said women's boxing would headline sold-out arenas, break pay-per-view records, and deliver fights that rival anything we've ever seen in the men's game, people would have laughed at you. But here we are watching warriors like Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano, Claressa Shields, Savannah Marshall, all these women rewriting the entire story of the sport. And it's not just about punches and knockouts, it's about grit, rivalry, pride, and legacy on the line every single time they step through those ropes. This isn't some side note. This is the main event of the culture now, and what's happening in women's boxing today will echo for decades. That's why this conversation matters, and that's why we're diving deep, because if you don't understand the magnitude of what's happening right now, you're missing out on one of the craziest, most inspiring chapters in fight history. You know what makes this whole Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano rivalry feels so legendary, man? It's the fact that we're not just talking about three fights. We're talking about three moments in history that actually shifted the landscape of boxing. Like when you say trilogy in combat sports, you think of Ali versus Frazier, you think of Gatti versus Ward, you think of those wars that define eras. And this one belongs right there because these two women aren't just fighting for belts, they're fighting for legacy. And the crazy part is how balanced it all feels. Like each time they meet, it's this clash of styles, personalities, and willpower that just creates electricity. The first fight was groundbreaking because it wasn't just a women's fight. It was the fight, the one everyone was talking about. The second kept the story alive. And then the third, man, the third was like the ultimate payoff, the kind of thing that makes fans feel like they're witnessing history wrap itself up. And what's beautiful is that neither of them could dominate the other. Serrano with her volume and ferocity, Taylor with her precision and composure. It was like watching two masters of completely different crafts colliding again and again, pushing each other to the absolute edge, and you can see in their eyes and their body language that this wasn't just competition. It was personal. It was legacy defining. And the reason people will always remember this trilogy is because it represents the pinnacle of women's boxing. It proved to the world that not only can women headline the biggest stages, they can do it with fights that rival anything the men have put on. And think about it. Madison Square Garden sold out, Netflix streaming worldwide, millions watching, and the narrative wasn't, oh, it's great for women's boxing. It was, this is just great boxing, period. And that shift happened because of them, because Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano pushed each other to produce greatness. And when you have two fighters who are so good that they force the absolute best out of each other every single time, that's when you get something we call legendary, because the trilogy itself becomes bigger than the fighters. It becomes a story. It becomes a reference point, something that future generations will look back at and say, that's when the game changed. And that's exactly what happened here. What's crazy about this fight, man, is when you actually dig into the numbers versus what your eyes are telling you, because on paper, the stats make it look like one kind of story, but in reality, when you're sitting there watching it unfold, you realize there's way more nuance to it. Like the official punch stats showed both Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano landed the exact same number of punches, 70 each, which is wild because when does that ever happen? But the way they got there couldn't have been more different. Serrano threw almost 400 shots, constantly pressing forward, pumping out volume, trying to drown Taylor in activity, while Katie only threw around 230, but still matched her in connects, which tells you everything about efficiency, accuracy, and timing. And here's where the argument begins, because if you're the kind of fan who values relentless pressure, aggression, and ring generalship, then your eyes probably told you Serrano was the one dictating the fight. She was the one forcing the pace. She was the one who looked like she was trying to break her opponent. But if you're the kind of fan who values precision, defense, clean power shots, and those moments where one fighter clearly gets the better of an exchange, then Taylor's performance looked superior. And that's what makes combat sports so fascinating. It's not just about the math, it's about interpretation, it's about how you weigh quality versus quantity. And that's why the decision was controversial, because half the people watching felt Serrano did more work, she poured more energy into the fight, and maybe deserved the nod for that. But the judges leaned toward Taylor, seeing her accuracy and composure as the difference maker. And honestly, That's the beauty and the frustration of boxing all at once, because numbers don't tell the whole story. They can't capture the impact of a perfectly timed counter. They can't measure the psychological edge of making your opponent miss and pay. And they can't always reflect the momentum swings that happen in the moment. So when fans argue about this fight, it's not really about stats versus outcome. It's about two totally valid ways of viewing the same performance. And that's why this trilogy is going to be remembered as much for the debates it sparked as the fights themselves, because sometimes the most legendary battles are the ones you can't quite put neatly into the box of numbers. The thing about controversial decisions in boxing is that they're not just about who landed more shots or who looked sharper. It's about the psychology of how we interpret a fight. And that's why this Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano trilogy fight had so many people up in arms. Because depending on what you value, you could make a legitimate argument. Either way, Serrano was the aggressor. She was walking Taylor down, throwing way more punches, pressing the action. And there's a part of you as a fan that respects that. Like you see the person who's trying to make the fight happen, who's pushing the pace, and you think that should matter. But then you've got Taylor standing her ground, countering, slipping, making Serrano miss, and then landing the cleanest, most effective punches of the fight. And the judges leaned in that direction. But here's the controversy, because for the average fan sitting at home, what sticks in your memory isn't always the single sharp counter shot. It's the person who's constantly throwing leather, making noise, keeping the pressure high, and that's Serrano. So people start screaming robbery, saying how can someone land the same number of punches but throw almost 200 less and still get the win? And the answer is that judges don't score volume alone, they score effective aggression, ring generalship, defense, and clean, hard punches. But the problem is that those criteria are subjective. Like, what's more effective? 10 jabs that touch the gloves and shoulders, or one straight right hand that snaps the head back. And that's where the frustration comes in, because it feels like the sport is rewarding one set of values over another. And if you're a Serrano fan, it feels like they robbed her of the work she put in. And if you're a Taylor fan, you're like, no, she outclassed her with timing and accuracy. So it turns into this polarizing moment where no one can agree. And in combat sports, those are the fights that stick with people the longest. Not the clean, decisive wins, but the messy ones where half the audience feels cheated. And boxing has this long history of controversial decisions. It's almost part of its DNA. And every time it happens, it reignites that whole debate about judging, scoring, and whether the system even works. And that's why this fight doesn't just live in the record books. It lives in the conversations, the arguments, the Twitter wars, the barbershop debates, because controversy keeps the story alive. You know what blows my mind about this whole Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano trilogy? It's not just about two fighters going at it. It's the fact that we're literally witnessing history being written in real time. Like, you've got to understand how insane this is when you put it into context. Because for decades, women's boxing was treated like a sideshow. Promoters didn't want to back it. Networks didn't want to air it. People dismissed it like it didn't belong on the same stage. And now you've got these two women headlining packed arenas, drawing massive global audiences, and doing it with a level of skill and grit that's forcing everybody to shut up and pay attention. And the cultural weight of that can't be overstated, because it's not just a fight. It's a moment where little girls around the world who love combat sports are seeing themselves in the main event. Not as an afterthought, not buried on the undercard, but at the absolute pinnacle of the sport. And when you think about Ireland, you think about Puerto Rico. These aren't just countries casually watching. They're nations that bleed for their fighters. Taylor has basically become Ireland's biggest sports hero since Conor. She's filling arenas and putting Dublin on the boxing map in a way that feels almost mythical. And Serrano, man, she's carrying the weight of Puerto Rico's boxing legacy, which is insane when you think about the lineage of champions that have come out of there. So every punch they throw isn't just about winning rounds, it's about representing entire cultures, entire histories. And you can feel that electricity when they fight. The crowd isn't just cheering for the person. They're cheering for identity, for pride, for all the years when women weren't given this platform. And now it's not just about the fight itself, but what it symbolizes. Like, think about the fact that this trilogy is being talked about in the same breath as the greatest rivalries ever. And that means in 20, 30 years, people are going to look back and say, this was the turning point. This was when women's boxing stopped being a novelty and became something undeniable. And you can argue about who won, who lost, the scorecards, the controversy, but you can't argue about the magnitude, because you were there when the sport evolved, when two women forced the world to pay attention and changed the trajectory forever. When you start thinking about legacy in a rivalry like Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano, it's crazy because you realize it's not just about who won this fight or who won that fight. It's about the story they're etching into the DNA of the sport itself. Like, legacy isn't decided in a single night. It's built brick by brick over years of sacrifice. And both these women have already secured a place where even if they never step in the ring again, their names are carved in stone. But what makes it wild is that they're still actively shaping it. Like, this isn't just a retrospective thing. It's unfolding right in front of us. You've got Katie, who's already looked at as the face of Irish boxing. Someone who literally carried the entire women's scene on her shoulders when no one believed it could be done. And then you've got Serrano, who's like a warrior from Puerto Rico with belts across divisions, proving that you can't talk about greatness without mentioning her name. So their legacies are secure. But what's fascinating is the future part, because every time they fight, every time they headline, they're kicking open doors for the next generation. And that's the ripple effect people don't always grasp. Like, imagine the 12-year-old kid watching this trilogy thinking, oh my God, I can be in Madison Square Garden one day. I can sell out arenas. And I won't be treated like a side act. And that's huge because the future of women's boxing doesn't just rest on the talent pipeline. It rests on the cultural acceptance, the business backing. And these two have forced that door open with blood and sweat. And the crazy part is how unpredictable the future still is. Like, will this rivalry push the sport into a golden era where women's fights consistently headline cards and get equal pay? Or will it be remembered as this unique lightning in a bottle moment? And that tension between legacy and future is what makes this whole thing electric. Because we don't know how the story ends, but we know that whatever comes after, whoever the next stars are, they're standing on the foundation Taylor and Serrano built. And that's the kind of impact that outlives records, outlives controversies, outlives scorecards. It becomes myth. And the future of the sport will always trace back to this moment, this rivalry, this clash of two women who refuse to be ignored. And that's the thing, man, when you step back and look at all of it, the rivalries, the controversies, the history, the legacy, you realize we're not just talking about fights. We're talking about moments in time that change the way people look at the sport and honestly change the way people look at possibility itself. These women didn't just box. They tore down walls. They forced the world to pay attention. They showed everyone what happens when you mix discipline, heart, and pure savage willpower. And that's why we'll be talking about these nights decades from now. It's bigger than belts, bigger than titles. It's about showing the next generation that if you've got the guts to chase something impossible, you can make the world bend to it. So to everyone who's been riding with us through this breakdown, thank you. Seriously, it means everything that you're here listening, thinking, questioning, just vibing with the story of combat sports and where it's going. Keep chasing your own fights, whatever they are. Don't be afraid to get hit. Don't be afraid to fall, because the only thing that matters is that you get back up and keep swinging. Good luck out there. Stay strong, stay curious, and we'll catch you in the next one. Much love. Thank you.